Let's pray. We thank you, gracious God, for the gift of this new day and for all your great gifts in creation. We pray that you will send rain upon the face of this part of our land today to refresh the plants and animals and all your creation. We pray too that you will refresh us with your Spirit. Give us joy in the things you give to us in our work, in all our dealings with each other, and in our service of you. We commend to you this community, all those involved in it, and those who work in it, the borders, in Jesus' name. Amen. The focus in Genesis 1 to 2:3 is God's creation of the big world. The focus in Genesis 2 is in God's creation of the little world of our experience, the human world. And the focus of that little world is a garden and marriage and home. One of the most important passages in the Bible, which deals with a very profound theology of marriage, which is totally different to pagan theologies of marriage, is found in Genesis 2. And that's what I want to focus on very briefly for the first part of today. We spoke about the emphasis on the similarity between male and female, man and woman, in terms of common humanity. Both are Adam, common creation in God's image and everything that entails. But something we mustn't forget is the common fallen state. There's always been a tendency in human beings to declare one or other of the sex either superior or inferior spiritually. The latest in the feminist movement is to see something genetically wrong with masculinity. That's merely the flip side of misogyny. Both male and female, men and women, are created in the image of God. Both are equally fallen and ravaged by the fall. But what Genesis also emphasizes is the dissimilarity between male and female. And there are three things that are emphasized, all rather obvious, at least until modern times. First of all, there is the dissimilarity of gender, male and female. God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. These aren't accidental differences, they are differences that are inbuilt in creation and are connected with the image of God. And building on that, there are the dissimilarity of identity. And there's a whole play of words here. The word ish and isha. Ish can be male, man, but is also husband. So man, male, husband. And from connected with that you get isha. Same root with a feminine ending. Right? Ish, isha. They mirror each other, yet they're different. And the difference is in the identity, male identity, connected with being husband, with being man. Female identity, wife, woman. So male and female is one thing, and out of that you get husband, wife. And the third dissimilarity is in family roles. Father, mother. Very strong emphasis is placed on Eve as the mother of all living creature. Eve, the name is Hava, which means life giver. The mother as the life giver. The Eve, who is the mother of the human family, as Adam is the father of the human family. Now, coming out of that then, fourthly, is the character of marriage as a divinely created humanity. One of the lies of Western individualism is to see that the smallest social unit is the individual. There's one of the very, very important dogmas is that human beings start off as individuals, as isolated persons, and then they contract themselves into relationships. Now, this is a very important modern teaching, if you like, but it contradicts realities. We were born in community, we live in community, we die in community. You never existed as an isolated individual. Already from the moment of your conception, you were there in your mother's womb, within that marital relationship of father-mother, and within the family. So the smallest social unit is not one, but three. Mother, father, child. It's one thing that Karl Marx re-emphasized, but from a completely different point of view, talking about the basic social character of human beings, that we live in community. And the fundamental building block of human community, and it's easy to demonstrate this sociologically and historically, is that nuclear family. But I'm not buying into the whole modern ideology of nuclear family, but is that nuclear family, that small mini community. That's God-given, that's God-created, that's God provided. In Luther's terms, it is one of God's holy orders, the order of family, the order of marriage. It precedes the fall. Now, what is the order of marriage? What does Genesis tell us about it? There's four things that I'd like to highlight. All of them are to some extent debated and controversial. The first thing that Genesis emphasizes is the primacy of the man, Adam, husband. Now, primacy here, I'm not using it in any hierarchical sense, in power terms, but I'm using it in terms of first. No, Adam comes first, Eve comes second. As Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 2, man was created first, woman second. Primacy, first. And there's certain things that follow from the primacy of Adam. You see, it could have been the other way around. God could have created woman first, and then the male second. First of all, there's the creation of woman creation of man before woman, what Paul calls headship. Headship has to do with origin, but also responsibility. Secondly, Adam is the one who's given responsibility to name the animals. Remember that God says it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper fit for him. And he creates animals and he names the animals. The naming of animals, but also he names Eve. He gives Eve her name. Great significance in the ancient world, naming, recognizing realities, naming realities, naming and giving identity. Until modern times, that would have been seen as being very much the father's responsibility to give a name, let's say, for example, to children. Giving of identity, naming. Thirdly, he's commissioned as to care for the garden, Now, behind this, there's quite an elaborate symbolism that I'd like to explain very briefly, without going into all the details of the argument. The Garden of Eden, God doesn't create a farm, God doesn't create jungle, but he creates a garden, and that garden is a grove, and it's named Eden, which means delight or joy or rapture or pleasure, enjoyment. So the garden of enjoyment, or the garden of delight. Now that signals that this is something a little bit unusual here. To understand the garden, you need to see the symbolism that's at work here, and how this account picks and reworks common sanctuary symbolism. Now this has been explored at some length by Othmakeel and other modern scholars who've had a look at iconography and the way temples were pictured and understood in the ancient world. And also you have the Garden of Eden as the archetypal sanctuary, the archetypal holy place. The place where the supernatural realm, the heavenly realm, overlaps with the natural realm. Now that intersection. Now this is commonly depicted in ancient iconography as a grove with trees, a kind of a park, a grove with fruit trees. If you go on a little bit further in the Old Testament, you find out that the pagan people, the Canaanites, worshipped their gods under every green and spreading tree. Their sanctuaries were typically gardens. And in the centre of the garden was the altar or whatever, or the idol, or whatever was the typical feature of that god. So you have a grove with trees. And the most important tree is the tree of life. Now, this is an ancient motif that you'll find all the way through Middle Eastern pagan temple ideology. The picture here is of the tree of life is usually located not here on earth, but in the realm of the gods, the mountain of the gods, the heavenly realm. And it doesn't belong to human beings, but only the gods have access to the tree of life. And human beings, in a limited way, in sanctuaries, in the holy places, have limited access to the tree of life, but basically doesn't belong to them. So you get the picture of the tree of life, which automatically signals now you're entering supernatural realm, not natural realm. It's not just tree that aids life, but it's the life-giving tree. Then you get a strange feature. I don't know if you've ever noted it. There's a spring in the centre of the garden. The garden isn't watered by rain, but it's watered by a spring. And that spring works in the opposite way to the way rivers normally work. Usually you have rivers running, from sources running into a common destination, the sea. But here you get a spring, a central spring, and out of that spring you get 4 rivers that water the face of the garden and the face of the earth. It's not your natural spring, it's a supernatural spring. Now this likewise is a motif that you'll find quite frequently in connection with temples, and you'll find it in connection with the temple in Jerusalem. Psalm 36 says about God and his temple with you is the fountain of life. Psalm That's Psalm 36. Psalm 46 talks about the river that gladdens the city of God. Ezekiel speaks about a new temple in which waters will come from the temple and will flow down to the Dead Sea and irrigate it and turn it into a fertile place. You get the same picture eschatologically of the new temple both in the prophecy of Joel and in the prophecy of Zechariah. So the picture of a life-giving spring. The fourth level of symbolism is the symbolism of gold and precious stones. Gold had supernatural significance in the ancient world. Can any of you work out why gold was the supernatural metal associated with the gods and the realm of the gods, and particularly one god? The sun. It's the precious metal. It's associated with the sun and the sun gods and the supernatural realm. And jewels were likewise regarded as symbols of supernatural light. Because there's something funny about jewels, because they seem to generate unnatural light. So they were, you have the symbolism of jewels, particularly the ones with bright colours, as symbolic of the supernatural realm. So people in the ancient world didn't wear gold or jewellery just for decoration, but gold jewellery had spiritual significance. It connected them with the supernatural realm. It gave them supernatural protection, the protection of the gods. By the way, the notion of jewellery just for decoration is a very, very modern invention. Jewellery still in most parts of the world has religious significance. So gold with precious stones. Fourthly, we read that God was walking about Hith halach. Halach is to walk. This is the Hith pa'al, to walk about in the garden. This is his place where he walks. God's presence is there. The same picture is used in Leviticus chapter 26 for God walking with his people and travelling with his people and being with his people in the tabernacle once it was established. Now, most importantly, and this is what I'm interested in focusing on, we read in chapter 2, verse 16, that God settled or placed Adam in the garden to avav it and to shamar it. Now, usually avav is translated as to care for or to till or to work, all of which are possible, and shamar, to care for. Now, avav, however, means quite literally to serve the garden. Shamar is to protect the garden. Now, these are two verbs that are used for the role of the Levites with the tabernacle. What were the Levites were to do? They were to avav the tabernacle, to serve the tabernacle, and they were to shamar, protect the tabernacle. Protect in the sense of protecting it from being desecrated. It's a holy place. It needs to be protected from defilement and desecration. So Adam's task is to protect the garden and to serve it. The verbs here, at least you can say, hint at his role as the archetypal priest. And that's the way Adam is understood in the rabbinical tradition, and it's also very strong in the early church. And if you read Genesis, Luther's Genesis commentary, he picks it up. It's not his invention. He gets it from the rabbis and from the early church. Adam as the archetypal priest and Eve as the congregation, the church. Remember that Paul says about relationship with husband and wife, relationship between Christ, who's the priest, and his bride, the church. That's not Paul's invention. Scholars say that that's already current in rabbinical thinking. He makes it Christological. Now, what happens is that Adam sins, and as a result of this, he is removed from the garden, and instead of avoving the garden, instead of serving the garden, he serves the Adamah, the soil, the ground. He serves the ground. And then his role to protect the garden is taken by the cherubim. Now, if you're interested in this, the most accessible stuff on this is off McHale, Symbolism of the Biblical World. Cherubim were supernatural creatures, angels, and the cherubim always guarded that point of transition from the natural realm to the supernatural realm. So if you had stylized cherubim at the entrance to a building, you know that once you passed those cherubim, you'd left the domain of human beings and you'd entered the domain of the gods. And in pagan theology, they protected the gods from demons and all sorts of spooky bad stuff. Now, the cherubim in the Old Testament and New Testament are the angels of the presence of God. They are God's bodyguard. They protect people from desecrating God's holiness, and they protect God's holiness from desecration. You remember the vision of Isaiah? The angels of the presence singing, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God of hosts. The whole world is full of your glory." They are the angels of the presence. So the cherubim guard the garden, and they prevent human beings from getting back and eating from the tree of life. Okay, that's symbolism. Now, at the most you can say there's allusions to this. It's not directly stated, it is implied. But I've given it to you because I think it's very, very illuminating and helpful. So, where am I? Okay. Adam is commissioned as the priest. Now, God gives him his task, which is to not look after the soil, not to be a farmer, but to be a custodian of the garden. And the garden is a holy place. He is to serve the garden and to preserve it, to protect it, to maintain the garden. Now, any questions on that? Okay, you get the basic argument? Now, the next point, you remember that God says that it's not good for Ha'adam, the man, the male, Adam, to be alone. And so he says, I will make a helper fit for him. I want to look at that last two terms in due course, but then you remember God puts Adam into a deep sleep and he takes the cellar. Now, usually that's translated as a rib, but it's actually the rib cage. My cellar is my rib cage, or at least one part of my rib cage. So it's not just one rib, now Adam's rib, but it's the rib cage. Something rather funny here. God puts him to sleep, he doesn't create woman from the ground, the way animals and Adam had been created, but he creates the woman from the man, or more exactly from his rib cage, and then brings the woman to man as the matchmaker and celebrates the first marriage. Now, what's the symbolism here? First of all, you need to understand the symbolism of bones in the ancient world, and until comparatively recent times, people had observed right from the beginning that the most indestructible part of a human being was the human being's bones. Now, flesh changes as you get older, and when you die, your flesh decays, but what remains? Your bones. So the bone was the basic substance of the person. And if you wanted to say, talk about in Hebrew about the essence of something or the substance of something, you spoke about it, the bone of something. Can you see the way it is? The bone is the essence of that. The modern equivalent, if you want symbolically, to symbolize it in modern terms, we know that bones also decay and disappear, but would be the DNA of a person, would be the closest you'd get to it. So the DNA of a person, that which basically constitutes the person and gives them their essential characteristics. So Eve is created from the bone, not the flesh of Adam, but the bone of Adam. Now I'm going to come to that distinction, flesh and bone. Now, why the rib cage? Once again, the rabbis, I think, nail it better than most modern exegetes. And they put it this way. They say, God did not create Eve out of the head of a man so that she would be over him. He didn't create her from his feet so that she would be under him, his doormat, but he created her from Adam's rib cage so that she would be next to his heart. Isn't that nice? Valentine's Day it should be today. Next to his heart, alongside of him. The notion of partnership, of complementary partnership.
It's also interesting to know that it's the rib cage guards your heart.
That's
guards
right.
These things, but the guards that let down. Like it's made symbolising a woman somehow, someone who has direct access to that kind of...
The heart, but also there's the idea of protecting the heart. Yeah. The heart is the most vulnerable part of a person's being, and so, the head also, so the rib cage protects the heart, that very vulnerable organ of human beings. The rib cage, now, the fathers in the early church go one step further. They take Paul's parallel between Adam and Eve, and husband and wife, and Christ and the church, where Paul talks about husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. How did Christ love the church? He sacrificed his body for the church. And they pick up, and there's some evidence that already the rabbis understood. We don't know at what period, because most of the rabbinical literature is only written down late period, but whether it was before Paul or whether it was them picking up what's basically a Christian idea, we don't know. But the idea here is that of sacrifice. So sacrifice is built right into the creation of humanity and to the creation of marriage. So for marriage to work, which way does sacrifice work? Usually in most societies, women are expected to sacrifice themselves to their husbands. But can you see the way this works? Right from the beginning, Adam sacrificed something that was very important, valuable, essential to him, to his rib cage, and made himself vulnerable, if you like. Your point there, Tom, for the creation of his wife, Eve. So the derivation of woman from his rib cage, the reality of sacrifice built into marriage right from the beginning. And that's carried over with the woman then. So the woman gets her life from Adam, and then the woman gives her life to her children. And so you get the principle of sacrifice being inbuilt into the way God constituted and created human beings. And you can see it most clearly where it does work in marriage, and that's the essence of marriage and family life, is self-offering, self-sacrifice. And where God himself is the one who presides over that and creates it. Yes?
I was going to say, but the core motive in our society is more rights-based.
It's rights-based.
And you see how it just tears everything apart. It's husband and wives, but even parents' rights over their children.
And children's rights over against
parents. And it's the complete opposite. It's rights rather than sacrifice.
Yes, and we see love in terms of rights rather than love in terms of self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yes, where was I? Okay, the primacy of the husband. Then it's also seen in terms of accountability. You remember the story, and you heard about it yesterday in chapel. The woman is tempted, and then she eats the fruit, and she offers it to her husband. A husband who should have been the teacher, who should have taken responsibility and dealt with the matter, but he goes along with her and is taught by her. But then it's interesting that God does not call Eve to account. Who does he call to account? Adam. Adam is the one who's held responsible for the fall, not Eve. Very interesting. He's regarded as the head. He is held accountable for what happens. He should have been the teacher, the priest, or whatever you like to put it, the head who dealt with it, but he goes along with it, and that's part of the fall. The accountability of the man. Now, that's the one side. Now, you could push that through, and that could be a recipe for dominance, but can you see it's very hard to push dominance onto this, particularly if if my exegesis of rib cage is right here. But if you ignore that and that, the first three here could be a recipe for male dominance, male chauvinism, sexual politics. But you can see here how these two turn that around. Now that becomes even clearer when you have a look at the woman's side of the marriage. Where's the... Oh, here we are. I'm giving you stuff here for your marriage addresses. You'll have to take lots of marriages. And one of the things that I've found in preparing people for marriage, couples for marriage, the best way of preparing is just to go through the wedding ceremony, to go through the rite, and to explain what's going on. And as you know, one of the foundational passages for all marriages, not just Christian marriages, is the passages from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And you can give the whole theology of marriage over against current secular notions of marriage by just going through the rite for marriage. Now, God creates marriage for three reasons, or he creates a wife for Adam for three reasons. First of all, he says it's not good that Adam should be alone. So what's the first purpose of marriage, the divinely given purpose of marriage? Community, not just community, companionship. It's stronger than community. Alone means company, means not general company, but personal company. Companionship. Now, initially God creates animals. Now, animals can give a form of companionship, but what can animals, why do animals fail in terms of companionship? Number one, sex, yeah. Also, intellectual stimulation. Probably wouldn't think of intellectual stimulation, but more broadly than that, animals cannot answer back. No, talk, communicate, all that kind of stuff. Which brings us now to the second and third. They can give a measure of companionship, but not full companionship. Because companionship is not just living together, but it has to do with modern term communication and everything that involves. The second purpose, God says, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper for him. Now, helper could be understood to our modern ears as an assistant. There's some places in the Old Testament where the verb azar, which means to help, can be to assist somebody in doing something. But say, for example, quite often the Psalms talk about God as my helper. It doesn't mean God's just my assistant. What does it mean? Sorry? A bit louder?
Rescuer.
Rescuer, quite often it is in the sense of rescue, but it's to help in trouble. It's not just assistant, but somebody who works together with you, and somebody who you work together. Probably here it's understood in terms of co-worker, partner. But it also has to do with rescuer, ally would be the word I'd use. So God is my helper means God is my ally in the battle. He's the one who will come and fight for me. God is my helper. God works with me and I work with God. God is my partner. Now, the focus in this is on relationship. The focus here is on working together. So instead of human beings working by themselves, they work together in a common task. So marriage involves partnership, working together. Not just living together, the company, but working together. Now there's a huge amount of stuff here that you could unpack. That's very, very profound. But notice also this notion that you touch on there of somebody who's your ally, who sticks up for you. There's no more fierce ally than a wife when her husband is under attack. That's something you may have already experienced. The third purpose of marriage, which is the most profound and odd, and there's an odd expression. It says, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper, usually translated suitable for him or fit for him. Now, the Hebrew is le-neg-do. Now, this is a very odd expression in Hebrew. Kleinig principle, look for the unexpected. Normally, the root here, neged, is used in the Old Testament as a preposition. That is a preposition. You are neged me. Neged means over against, opposite, facing. You and I mean, you are neged to me. Now, that's the normal expression. Now, behind that, so it's usually a preposition. But in this place, it's the only place in the Hebrew Bible where it's used as a noun. Now, it is possibly, what lies behind this here is neged as a noun, which means something like the opposite. Here it's used as a noun, and the only place it's such. So, what does leg neg though mean? I will make, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper as what? His opposite. His face to face with him. His other half. But it gets a bit close to it. But it's also as his, as his complement. You know the complement with an E? If you think in terms of a circle, two halves, they are opposite each other. There's opposite, and the notion here is of two people who are opposite each other, and yet what do? They fit together and complement each other. And that's one of the most profound features of every marriage that works. Opposites attract, all those cliches. It's worth, and those of you married who analysing your own marriage in terms of the opposites that'll work as well as similarities. So you have to have something in common, that circle, and yet you need to have opposites. And you'll find out that the longer you live together, strangely speaking, you don't become more identical with each other, but you complement each other as time passes on. Good working marriage. The whole notion here of opposite, complementarity.
Complementarity is funny because it both means that you're different. You're not the same.
Yep.
Because sometimes we think complement means the same, but it can be by definition different.
It is by definition different. So if you think in two halves of a circle that fit together, and that's also the part of the idea of rib cage. Adam loses something, but he gains what he lost with bonus, with much more thrown in than once they're brought together again. So something's lost, but what's lost is more than regained a second time. Another way of looking at it is, and that I like to think about it, is in terms of a polarity. Now, for those of you who know physics, you know that magnetic fields, for every positive you have a negative. There's a kind of polarity in marriage, and you'll see it most particularly in the whole sexual area. Marriage works, if you think in terms of sex working in marriage, it works in terms of polarities. Not just in terms of complementarity, but polarity. Polarity is the idea of opposites, and yet somehow opposites too belong together. And the idea of polarity, whereas in terms of complementarity, any one of these could be first. There's no logical priority here, but in terms of priority, which is the logical priority? The positive creates the negative. The negative works properly when the positive works properly. So in marriage, one of the strange things about marriage is that the more a husband fulfills his role fully and is a husband, the more the wife becomes a wife. The easier it is for a wife to assume her role. And the heart of it lies, if you go to what Paul says in Ephesians, husbands who are prepared to sacrifice themselves for their wives. So there is the idea there of a complementarity. So the woman is the complement or the counterpart. That's quite a good term too. Musically, you have with counterpoint or counterpart, if any of you know, music is the thing turned around. The same thing, but it's reversed. counterpoint or counterpart. Now, there's three features. The first I've already touched on. Remember that when God brings Eve to Adam, he says, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Now, flesh is, if you like, not just this in Hebrew terms, but has to do with kinship. Your flesh is the people that you are related to in terms of kinship. We'd say blood relationships, they say flesh relationships. So the members of your family, genetic part, is that. Now, the strongest identity that you can get in human relationships is natural relationships, is family relationships. But so one flesh union is, no, this woman is like my sister or like my mother. But when it's one bone unity, it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that flesh unity to the essence. That there's something here that is stronger even than one of the strongest natural communities, which is the community of family and kinship. So stronger this companionship is stronger than family companionship, kinship. It's bone of bone. Involves partnership with husband. They work together. He's not the boss, she's not the slave, but they are co-workers, partners, co-operators, allies in work. And then thirdly, there's the element of interdependence with orientation. You know that Ish is man, Isha is woman. You also know from your Hebrew that the R ending is not just the feminine ending, but it is the directional ending. So I went to Adelaide, Adelaide R. To the sea is CR. So this is a directional ending. And Genesis seems to be playing on this, and Paul plays on this when he, in 1 Corinthians, he says, the woman is from the man, and she is to the man. And you see the to the man? She gets her identity and finds her fulfillment over against her relationship with the man. But it's a relationship of not of dependence, but interdependence. Ish and Isha, interdependence. Okay, that's the second point. The third point, which is very strong here, is woman as the crown of creation. You know, God created Adam, creates the garden, trees, animals, but the last thing he creates is a woman and creates marriage then. He's the celebrant, bringing Adam and Eve together, and there's the creation of marriage. So the woman and marriage is the crown of creation. She's the center of the marriage. She's the center of the home. If you think in terms of the garden, that's Adam's business, but the home is Eve's business. Right? The crown of the home, the little creation.
And so bone of bone and flesh of flesh also functions as like a superlative sort of.
It's superlative. Wherever you repeat something, it is. This woman is more like is more. Is
the boniest bone and the flesh.
Yes,
flesh.
The closest woman that I've ever seen to me. Yes, boniest bone or fleshiest flesh. She's pretty good, in other words. Now, there's one thing I'd like to emphasize, which is unexpected. See if you can work it out. At the end of chapter 2, there's a concluding sentence. Therefore a man leaves his father and mother, cleaves or sticks to his wife, and the two become one flesh. Now, if you want to have a recipe for the dynamics of marriage, and for marriage to work properly, this is it. Now, what's unexpected about the first two? Therefore, a man leaves father and mother. Michael? Kleinig principle, look for the unexpected. I better not go too far. Okay, what's funny about saying, therefore, a man leaves his father and mother? What's the normal order in all societies?
The woman leaves her parents.
The woman leaves her parents, her family. She takes on the family name. So Claire was a Bentley. When she married me, she left her family. She became a Kleinig. And in the ancient world, it was you went to your husband's family, his house. So you leave, the woman automatically, and that's built into marriage, leaves her family. But notice here, it's reversed. This is countercultural in all societies. For a marriage to work, what's the first thing that has to happen? The bloke, the man, needs to leave mum and dad, needs to leave home, leave his parents. By the way, if I've had a lot to do with people with various marital problems, this is one of the commonest problems of difficulties in marriage, where blokes have not been able to cut their apron strings with mum and their ties with dad. And it happens at many levels. It's not just the physical side, but it's at many different levels.
Expectations of your wife, your wife should be like your mother.
Your wife.
Even if you never even see your mother or talk to her, that can function.
That can function that way. And then the mother-in-law demands loyalty from her boy, her husband, and interferes with the marriage. Hence all the mother-in-law jokes stuff. Now, leaving, okay. Notice that this is not a statement of demand, but a statement of fact. It's because of this, what's possible to happen? A man can leave his father and mother, which, if you like, is a kind of a suicide, because he gives up everything for an uncertain future. He gives up what's certain. His relationship with mother, father, brother, sisters, they're given relationships, to enter into something which is uncertain, no guarantees. That's the first thing about marriage. Second thing, he cleaves to his wife. Usually it's the other way around. The wife cleaves to the husband. Now, what's attached to cleave? There's a whole lot of different sense. It's very, very strong. It means stick, like some Durex on your skin, or a Band-Aid on your skin. Sticks to his wife. But it's not just accidental, I know, but it is something that's deliberate. You decide to stick. You cleave. The closest English word that I can think of, commits to his wife. You know, one of the biggest problems as I see it, in the relationships between the sexes in your generation? Blokes are not prepared to commit themselves. It's going the other way now, that women also are reciprocating and don't want to commit themselves, but one of the problems is the difficulty of blokes committing themselves. Now, for a marriage to work, notice the emphasis is not on what the wife does, but on what the husband does. He leaves, he cleaves, he commits himself, no reference to what wife does. And then the third thing is the two become one flesh. Now, this is an odd expression. It's unusual, it's paradoxical, and it has a number of different levels to it. But the two most important ones are the two becoming one flesh, quite physically, has to do with sexual intercourse.
The beast with two backs.
The beast with two backs, the two halves of the circle coming together and embracing each other. The polarity firing. right? It has to do with sexual intercourse. But it also has to do with the two become one flesh. It's procreation. But it has to do with the whole physical side of marriage. More broadly, cohabitation, flesh, the physical side. There's a whole physical union that's involved. But the essence of that physical union is sexual intercourse and children. One of the most profound books on marriage that I've seen written is by Walter Trobisch, who was a Lutheran missionary in Nigeria, where he had to face problems like polygamy and people cohabiting, and where there was little respect for marriage. And he wanted to teach Christian marriage to the converts there. And he wrote a book which I think is just as useful for our community, because what's happening now is that people are getting things back to front. It's interesting, except for you guys here at the Sem that I've married, in all the marriages that I've had in the last 5-10 years have started at the wrong end. Do you know which end they've started? One fleshing coming first, and then the commitment.
It's a kind of gradual.
There's a kind of personal cohabitation. So you have sexual intercourse, then you move in with each other, and then finally you do the social thing. You have the leaving. You have the family communal side, which is the marriage ceremony, but entering the wrong end of marriage. For marriage to work best, which is the order? Leaving, cleaving, and then one fleshing. Now, Trobisch speaks about it as 3 parts to the triangle. There's entering at one of the wrong ends, but there is the right end, which is God's order, or 3 legs to a stool. The stool won't be able to stand unless you have all 3 legs in place. The marriage won't work unless you have all 3 of these working. But the most important one is that family social one, the leaving and the cleaving, first before the one fleshing. That's God's order. That's the order which brings God's blessing with it.
And that's how the marriage ceremony works. There's that giving of the parents,
yep.
The commitment of lifelong, I'm always going to be with you.
And then there's the consummation. Righto, that's the proper order. I would urge you to get hold of that book if you can. When I looked up, it wasn't on sale anymore, but there were copies on eBay that you could still bring. If you can't, photocopy it in the library or somebody and have it on file. I Married You, Walter Trobisch. Have any of you read it? Do any of you know it? Do you agree? It's particularly for the approach that's there is the approach that I take every time I prepare a couple that are living together already and having sex for marriage, to show them the importance of marriage, but also to challenge them about what they've been doing in a gentle way, and to say it's not entirely wrong, but they in a sense have stuffed things up for themselves, and there's penalties if you go the wrong way. There are inevitable penalties, and you can see that most clearly as time passes. Yes?
I was just going to ask a question. Is there something to be said about the woman being the crown of creation?
Yes.
Because God's created the world, God's created man,
yes.
And now he's passed on some of his creation ability onto the woman and said, well, now your turn.
Yes, so it's handballing.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the sacrifice part of it. It's the passing on, and then the woman, if you go on, becomes the mother. She hands on the life that she's received then to children. And it's interesting. It's only if this works that a woman or a wife is ready to have children. And it's not just ready to have children, but having children in a healthy way, that the children, particularly the son, doesn't displace the husband at a deep level, and she's able to give herself to the children if she has a husband who's prepared to give himself and commit himself to her then the woman is free to commit herself to children. But where that's not happened, then that whole child-rearing thing becomes very, very problematic. And you can see it everywhere. So you get fatherless children and the devastation that wreaks in community. Yes, that's nicely observed. Just lastly, oh yeah, Craig, I think I've come unity in one flesh. What's most interesting is that God is depicted in Genesis 2 as the marriage ceremony. He brings Eve to Adam. Now, that picture is of the marriage celebrant in the ancient world. You know, you get the matchmaker, the person who transacts the marriage, brings the wife to the husband. So God is the marriage celebrant. And that's what Jesus gets at when he says, what God has joined together, let no one separate or put asunder. Jesus is picking up this passage and says that wherever you get a marriage, whether it's a church marriage or a secular marriage, you have the same marriage celebrant. God is the marriage celebrant. So strictly speaking, when I marry a couple, I'm not the one that's marrying them. They don't marry themselves. God is the marriage celebrant, bringing them together. Whether they recognize it or not, God is there transacting that marriage.
Because you said that even when two people who aren't married come together and...
Yeah,
in some way it's...
Yes, I'm saying, well, you're saying, no, God is at work here.
Yeah.
Whether you recognise it or not, you're having a Christian marriage, and I need to explain to you the point of the marriage ceremony. Whether you believe it or not, recognise it or not, this is what the church teaches. And the church teaches that God's way of, bringing the marriage about is, first of all, leaving, secondly, cleaving, one fleshing. And then I ask them, well, where do you sit now? What's happened for you after I've explained it? They say, oh, yeah, well, how did it start? Well, yeah, we had that. And then eventually led to commitment. And now we want to formalise that commitment, and we want to get recognition from our family that we are an item. But yes, and to see that God is at work there.
Even to say, sorry, when just secular people have sex, just friends or whatever, outside of any kind of form of commitment.
Yes.
There's still an element of God bringing man and woman together in that.
That's right.
It's in the order of creation.
It's in the order of creation. It's not something that only happens if we acknowledge it or think it. It's ontological. It happens everywhere. God is at work in the business of sex, and he's trying. This is what he's trying to create. Human beings can muck it up, but there's penalties if you muck it up, and there's great blessings if you go along with it. This is God's order for marriage, and it's a very profound order, and it works. There's no doubt that it works, whether you believe it or not. Let's have a break, and if there's any further questions, I'll be happy to deal with them.